Today I want to tell you about how to speak up with authority, guys. You should be focusing on the way that prospects perceive you rather than the way that you perceive yourself. You could believe that you sound confident and thoughtful, but your prospects may be hearing hesitation and weakness. Vocal authority comes first, even before that in your English fluency, because from a lot of studies indicate that the ability to portray vocal authority actually influences way more on high-stakes decisions than anything else. It's a huge factor, separating struggling closers from successful ones. In order for you to reveal why your voice is sabotaging your sales, you need to take a deeper look into your own voice and really be extremely critical so that you can actually pinpoint exactly why you might not sound as confident or as authoritative as you would think. A lot of closers focus on scripts. It doesn't really matter how well your script is put together. If you're not actually performing the way you should when you're delivering that script, then it's not gonna matter because the prospect is gonna see that you are full of shit. Now, I want you to think of a hypothetical situation. I want you to think of a skilled closer. Let's call him Marcus, and then he's on a call. He's supposed to be closing a $50,000 deal, and the prospect is a perfectly qualified prospect. He's ready to buy, but then he just flops. The prospect quickly became disinterested and he ended the call. Marcus goes back to the recording and then he goes, man, what the hell is going on here? He's trying to figure out what's going on. After listening to his own recording, then he hears his own voice and he can actually tell that he was unsure, he was apologetic, and he was very quiet the whole time throughout the call. And then he was asking for permission rather than leading the actual conversation. He actually could tell why the prospect lost complete interest on what he was saying because of these little factors. He was unsure, he was apologetic, he was quiet, and he was asking for permission rather than leading the conversation. And this was the main mistakes that he was seeing. Prospects make a subconscious decision and the first few seconds about hearing your own voice, based purely on your vocal cues. On a call, your voice does all the work of your body language and facial expressions. There was a study performed by UCLA that shows that vocal authority actually impacts trust way more than visual appearance on sales calls. And there was a separate study that found that 73% of a higher likelihood of buying when vocal authority was perceived by the prospect. Hesitation in your voice translates directly to hesitation in the prospect's mind about your offer. I want to really drill this into your brain, okay? Hesitation in your voice translates directly to hesitation in the prospect's mind about your offer. It doesn't matter how good your offer looks. If you are hesitating about your delivery or about the features or about the match, the prospect is not going to trust you. It doesn't matter what you say. Most closers are completely unaware of their vocal impact because they focus on what they're saying and not how they're saying it. So that's why I always recommend that you watch your own sales calls a couple of times, to make sure that you really understand not only the words that you were pronouncing wrong, because there are a lot of different things that you can be paying attention to. See, this is the same reason why I have always recommended that when you watch movies to learn expressions, you need to rewatch the movie or the TV show several times to do different things after every session. One session you review the expressions. On the second session, you basically take notes about the different verbs, maybe, and then on a third rewatch, then you maybe listen for the different cultural nuances on the interaction, right? So on sales calls, it's the same thing, but instead of watching a movie, you're watching your own performance. So you need to actually account for all of these factors and pay attention to each of them because, trust me, they make more of an impact than you might think. Your voice must communicate that you deserve respect and attention. So this is like a doctor or a plane pilot, right? So imagine a pilot goes into a plane, and there's like 300 passengers, and then all of a sudden a passenger gets nervous because he's afraid of flying, right? And then the pilot says, should I worry? You say, well, I don't think you should, but there might be storms throughout the flight, and there are some studies that show that the plane could explode, but there's nothing to worry about. You need to be really careful about the words that you choose and the things that you explain and the tonality that you use, because it's like a doctor that's diagnosing cancer on a patient or telling a father that his son is about to die or whatever. You need to be really careful about the choice of words and the tonality that you use. The same way that a doctor is providing really, really important information to a patient regarding their health status, right? You are also delivering a lot of really key information to a prospect, because usually it's a big decision. Any kind of high ticket product or service is a huge decision most of the times for prospects, especially if it's B2C. Someone is not going to drop you $10,000 from their hard-earned money just out of nowhere. They need to really see the value on the information that you're providing. Not only the value, the tonality, the confidence that you deliver that information with, right? So there's a lot of different factors into play that you need to remember. The way that you listen to yourself in your brain is different, because you're listening to your own filter in your skull, in your head, in your brain. So you could sound completely different from what the prospects hear. You're used to listening to yourself in your native language for like 20 plus years, but it's different in English. If you put together the amount of hours that you have listened to yourself talking straight in English, if you put up all those hours, if you add all those hours up together, it's probably like not even 2% of the amount of hours, or even 1% of the amount of hours that you have spent listening to yourself in Spanish, Portuguese, in German, or in French, right? That's why you need to make up for that difference with reviewing your own performance in English. In Spanish or in Italian or in French, you have already done that unconsciously, because you have been using your language for many, many years artificially. When you hear your own recorded voice, you are finally hearing the truth. Maybe you don't like your voice. Maybe you sound jarring. You sound like unfamiliar. You sound weird. You sound awkward, right? If that's what you hear, that's what prospects hear. So you need to get to a point where you listen to yourself and you actually like your voice. And this is tricky because, you're not used to listening to yourself in English. This disconnect magnifies insecurities about your accent and your grammar. What sounds fine to you may be difficult for prospects to understand. There's going to be a disconnect. You don't know how to improve. You don't know which areas you should be focusing on in your own skill proficiency or on your own sales delivery, right? So that's why this is really important, guys. You need to really invest time, because you are at a disadvantage because it's your second language. The more reason you should be doing this, right? So closers avoid listening to their recorded calls due to this discomfort. This is uncomfortable, guys. You gotta get used to this. Listen to yourself. Some sales calls can get uncomfortable, but then imagine going back and watching yourself being uncomfortable. Then you're also going to become way more uncomfortable listening to yourself feeling uncomfortable and looking uncomfortable, right? So this is it's going to be stacking up. The more you do it, the less uncomfortable you're going to feel performing the delivery on the sales call. There's two extremes here. So if you speak too quietly, this is going to signal weakness. It's going to signal lack of belief in your offer. It's actually not in your offer. Maybe you are just less confident because you're scared of making mistakes in English. So maybe it's more lack of belief in your ability to speak English, right? But for the prospects, it's all about the offer. The prospects are going to see this guy doesn't even, he can barely speak English, confident enough, let alone delivering a good offer, giving me a good description of this offer, or being able to capture all the nuances about my personal situation to give me the good match. You need to try to avoid speaking too quietly, but also speaking too loudly, because if you speak like crazy, like too loud the whole time, you're going to show desperation, aggression, and insecurity. And you're going to basically get the prospects onto a defensive mode. From my experience, the perfect ideal volume level is between 6 to 7. If you were to put it from 1 to 10, 10 meaning like you sound crazy, and 1 meaning they can barely hear you, I would put it into mostly 6 to 7. This commands authority without being overwhelming, and it communicates that you expect to be heard and respected. Sticking to one volume level throughout the whole call. which this could very easily become like background noise. The solution here is being able to modulate your volume strategically and lower it whenever you want to like draw the attention to a specific thing, and then increase your volume slightly to make the point across when you want to like make a more impactful point about a situation. You want to use your tonality as a tool of control of the conversation. We want to pace the conversation because it's going to control the prospect's emotional state and the attention. So the problem here is that if you keep a single monotonous speed, this will cause them to check out mentally. So imagine you are driving on the highway. So if you just have to drive for like 4 hours straight on the highway on a straight line, you can become sleepy, you can become bored, you can become disengaged. So on sales calls, it's the same thing. If you keep the same tonality, the same volume the whole time, the prospect is going to disengage from you and is going to lose interest in your offer. So bottom line here is you want to become the conductor of the conversation. So you want to use the tempo to create excitement, urgency, or intimacy depending on the situation. Silences are important also in sales calls because it's basically those little spaces between words and those strategic pauses, which is where credibility is built a lot of times. Because it's not so much about the words, it's also about knowing when to listen and knowing when to give time to the prospect to think. A huge one here is gap fillers, filler words, filler gap words. So these are words like, sort of, kind of. These words really come from things like fear of silence. So they basically broadcast the uncertainty and basically they instantly destroy your authority. So that's why you need to try to destroy them as much as possible. Now, the way to do this is to slow down, think about the next sentence, think about the best alternative to expressing the idea that you have in your head, and then also is listening to yourself, watching yourself again, slowing down so that you have time to think, and then if you catch yourself wanting to use a gap filler word, then you just continue with the next iteration of the arguments that you wanted to put across. When you listen to yourself, write down all those words and all those gap fillers, because those are like the things that are hardest to actually catch because they're not actual words. They're just gap fillers. So if you actually use these pauses, prospects get time to internalize your message and to connect with it emotionally, right? So this is where buying decisions started to come into place. So that's why this needs to be implemented methodically and systematically. Pausing after a question creates pressure and compels the prospect to respond and to move the sale forward. These pauses before a key point acts like a spotlight. So this is like as if you were highlighting something on a book, right? So you want to make the information more memorable and more impactful. And sometimes pauses emphasize. So you might think the opposite because pauses is like complete silence, right? But sometimes pauses create like a little lake of information and say, okay, so this is the lake. This is what you need to be focusing on right now. Get comfortable with silence because this demonstrates confidence, control, and authority. And basically it's gonna separate professional closers from amateurs. After asking any question, you want to count to 3 in your head before speaking again. This will feel uncomfortable at first, but you will sound way more authoritative to them. It's not like you're just trying to fill in the gaps. You need to make the prospect feel like you know what you're doing. So every question needs to be like a curated question that has impact, to move the deal forward. Facial expressions physically changes the shape of your vocal cavity and it directly controls your vocal tonality. So if your tone doesn't match your words, if you look bored, or you look uninterested, then the prospects are going to disconnect from you completely. Match the words, the script that you're using with the kind of tonality and the facial expressions that you're using. If you have a dead face, then you talk with a static facial expression and you create a monotone, robotic delivery. This is gonna signal that, basically you're just a number, like the prospect is just a number and you are not really there trying to help them. So that's why there needs to be a bond between your face, your words, your tonality, and your ability to deliver the solution to the prospect. Practice speaking with intentional facial expressions like smiling when you're talking about the benefits, or maybe squinting slightly for when you're trying to show that you're focusing on the message. These things, it's not about perfect English, it's more about a commanding presence that makes people want to listen and follow your lead. So what I recommend that you do now is that you should record yourself as much as you can and analyze the gap between your perceived voice and your actual voice. And you should listen critically to your volume, your pace, your pauses, and your tonality as much as you can.